about the homeschool dad, just very briefly going back over a lot of times in the homeschool is only the home overflows into the homeschool. And so there is the home has to be healthy in order for the homeschool to be healthy. And a lot of times our expectations with each other, with our spouses, being on the same page, having an atmosphere and whatnot of respect and love and that type of thing flows over. But there tends to be a tension that needs to be worked out. I think a couple of tips that I would have for anybody who is struggling with a dad who is not supportive and isn't there yet. Number one, we give each other room for growth, right? My wife and I got married very young, and we started dating. I think I was 14, she was 13. So I was very much an emotional child at the time, and the process of growing into an emotional adult has not been that pleasant. So these are some of the things that we've kind of learned, I would say, and it offered more as a token of advice. Number one, Thanksgiving. Find something that you can be thankful for in your relationship and what you have. And that's not because necessarily the other person is deserving of that, but that is to begin to help yourself move out of a bad brain spot into a good brain spot. And then begin to build on that. Number two is love the homeschool you have, not the one you wish you had. In every family, there are dynamics that can be capitalized on. In our homeschool, we talk a lot about business. We talk a lot about psychology and marketing and that type of thing. I do not enjoy the outdoors. So that's a disadvantage my kids have versus families whose husband may enjoy the outdoors and hiking and hunting and those types of things. That's something that a family could capitalize on that my family can't. So my family capitalizes on things, on other things. But that's knowing the strength of your family and focusing on that. Number three, looking for the wins and reward the behavior you want. So if your husband comes in and he's willing to read a story to one of the kids, maybe he's willing to score some of the work. Maybe he's willing to be part of the discussion that's going on. When he does, to reward that behavior that you are looking for. We like to be rewarded. I think everybody enjoys being acknowledged when we move in the right direction. And so even if it's a matter of, hey, we took the boys out and we shot bow and arrow for half an hour and I invested in them, hearing that, hey, I really appreciated that you took them out and you spent time with them, because we're homeschooling the whole child, right? Not just the academic side. And so we have to be mindful of that as well. It's not all just about books, that there is an academics, there is an emotional well-being as well. So looking for the wins. Number four, and some of these I'm going kind of fast because I went through it in the previous video and I don't know where that is, but I wanted to cover a little bit of it. But number four, a lot of times, this is something that I've seen, it was myself included, we don't necessarily have to become emotional adults because it isn't required of us. And I think that there are times where it's important to give the responsibility for leadership over and let the chips fall where they may. So a case in our life, I was making some financial decisions and negotiating different things for our future. And up until that point, Kristen had a large responsibility of doing the finances. And it didn't matter what decisions I made, she would kind of have to work it all out and deal with the consequences. And she was very good at it, but the stress that she carried was very intense, especially because she didn't have a lot of control over what I was able to negotiate, what I was able to do. And so she basically took everything and said, I think it's fantastic that you have the ability to work hard, to produce an income, and to negotiate our futures. But here's something you need to consider when you do that. Here's the finances. And I think on her part, it took a tremendous amount of trusting the Lord with that decision. But at the same time, it was one of the best things that happened, because for me, I had to man up, if you will, and realize that what it was required to do what I wanted to do, all of these things had to be factored in. And well, it was a little bit like seeing an airplane kind of hit a pocket, where you catch your own and then have to start to come up. It was a good thing for me to have to emotionally mature in that area. So I think sometimes we don't require young husbands to become men, because we pick up the slack and we enable it, and then get frustrated that they're not there on the same page. And really, that's something that has to be worked out in practice. So in helping your husband to understand things that would have been beneficial and are beneficial to me, avoiding bad brain. So bad brain is when you go into that spot emotionally where you're not really thinking anymore. Now you're just defending. You're not arguing you're not constructive in discussion. We're not building now. We're just building walls. We're not actually building and solving the problem. And we all have triggers, and these triggers cause us to feel that emotional defensiveness. And once that happens, pretty much you've ended the dialogue for constructive discussion. Once that happens, it becomes more about how quickly can I protect myself, how quickly can I defend myself, and I'm in a emotional fight or flight response in my body that basically shuts off the creative part of my brain. And so when we have those discussions, I think having a discussion from the standpoint of, I want this to be better. I respect that God has given you responsibility in a home, that God has given you leadership role in our home and over our family. And because of that, I want to have an understanding of what your expectations are. And if you'd like to know my expectations and what I would like to see, we could have that discussion and then begin to look at how do we accomplish those goals. The moment it begins to feel that there's going to be a shame laid out that says, we're here because you suck, that typically is going to cause bad brain, and nothing good begins to happen. So the best you can to avoid bad brain responses, and that's not just in the other person, right? So if I say, can we please talk about this because this is something that concerns me and I want to have that discussion. But in doing that, the other person feels triggered and goes into a bad brain response and says something back to me that has the potential to make me feel triggered. And so I have to be prepared emotionally as well, that what I'd like to have is a discussion. If you're not ready for that discussion, I can appreciate that. But when you are, then let's do that. And now's probably not the best time. Okay. So this has been one of those topics, like there's no conversation and a lot of people are coming and going. So if you have anything to add, please do. I would love to hear it. Let's see. Number 6, I would definitely, like I said in the previous, asking what are your educational goals? You know, my children bear my last name. What do I want my legacy to be? What is my emotional and investment into that process? And if it's all your expectations and there is no opportunity for them to say what's important to them, they're probably not going to buy into it a lot. So, and I think sometimes we have to ask each other the questions like, what is our organizational goal for our family? What do we want our family to be? That causes us to think, that causes us to evaluate our actions. If we're never asked, we don't actually discover growth opportunities. And part of like a coaching, like a life coach, if you hired a life coach, part of their thing is, you know, answers, but what you need to do is ask good questions so that the other person can discover the answers on their own. And so, obviously we want our kids to succeed. We want them to have a leg up in life as they go through life. We want them to avoid as much pain as possible, even though it's inevitable. And when they do encounter pain, we want them to be healthy in that pain and grow through that process, right? And so by asking our spouse those questions, what do you want for our kids? What do you want when our kids are 20 and 30? What do you want their life to look like? And is everything we're doing right now, is it contributing to that? And how can we do better at that? And then be open to it. And their opinion, even if it involves something that may trigger us a little bit, I think we have to be careful that we give them the right to say the way they feel and to have the ability to express that without taking it personal. Okay. Another thing that I would say is, and this is difficult, but is to raise the bar. We are the average of the top 5 people we surround ourselves with. And sometimes we have to look around and say, you know what, I don't have a high enough circle of influence around me. I need to begin looking for some influences around me that challenges me, that causes me to want to be a better person. And that's tough because a lot of times we look for people that make us comfortable with who we are and maybe even a little bit under where we are so that we're the positive influence. But if we don't hit that bar, then we tend to go down. One of the challenges we've had in coming to a new land, if you will, is in finding a healthy place for our family, a church family. And what I wanted was a place where we were all being challenged spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, that type of thing. And when you find yourself in the room with guys who are mature, who understand the awesome privilege it is to be able to lead others and to lead ourselves well, who have a sense of chivalry and integrity, when you find yourself as a guy in that place, you're confronted. It's a standard, and you either have to begin to up your game or you bail. And I think it's important for all of us to make sure that our circle of influence is healthy and that we're contributing to that circle of influence as well. But sometimes we have to look and say, you know what? This circle of influence isn't really helping us. It's not helping us. We need to be in a healthier place. And as a family, from our experience, sometimes that's a hard thing to do, to move into a place where you have healthier relationships, healthier church family, that you turn off the television as an influencer or Netflix or the internet, because if we're not in a circle that's all part of our influence, our circle of influence. Studies have shown that like just 15 minutes of Fox News in the morning can have a terrible impact on our day. And so just taking something as simple as saying, you know what, we're not going to feed ourselves that. We're going to feed ourselves more positive things. We're going to find some good spiritual teachers that we can begin listening to. We're going to maybe find some life coaching that can help us make better decisions about our choices. Those types of things can really have an impact on beginning to become more intentional. One of my sad spots in the homeschooling movement is that when I got in, there were a lot of very strong masculine influences who set very high standards for the behavior of a homeschool dad. And that challenged me as a young dad to try to up my game. I had a long way to go. I was extremely immature. I was an emotional child most of my masculine life, did not understand what was expected or required of me. But as I've done that, the more I do that, the more I realize, wow, the voices I have, the things that I'm putting into my brain have such a big impact on my ability to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend, a good employee, all of these things. And so I can't stress enough how important that circle of influence is. Okay. Number 8 would be to allow room for growth, that we are all on a journey, and we deal with this fallen sin nature, right? The tendency to be self-reliant, to exalt ourselves, to look out for the needs of ourselves at the expense of others, all of that's built into this tension that we have. We're in a growth process, and so we want to continue growing. Perfection, if our standard is perfection, we never reach it, and we just set the bar low. If we can set the standard for growth, then I think we really help ourselves. It's like we didn't get it right, but hey, we're growing, we're moving in the right direction, and today is better than yesterday, and it certainly is better than 2 years ago or 10 years ago. That's the atmosphere we want, not just for us, but we want that for our kids too, right? We don't parent many adults. We are discipling them, we're training them, we're preparing them. Well, we have to do that with ourselves as well, and give each other a little bit of room for growth in that area. A 20-something dad is not going to be as mature as a 50-something dad. And it's not going to happen. There's too much life experience. There are too many hard knocks that have to be worked out. It's part of the growth process, part of the learning process. And we have to give room for that maturing. God, in his infinite wisdom, put into creation growth. And there's, every bottle of wine is different. There's differences. Now that there's a certain vintage, there's a certain maturing process, there's a certain element, but that individual growth and fermentation process, it's a process. Well, all of us are in process. And I think it's easy. We have to make that transition from emotional child to emotional adult. We have to learn the self-regulation that we talked about last week. Even as adults, we have to learn that process. Becoming a good homeschool dad is something that I think just takes time. Some guys have a really good example of that. And because of that example, they have the leg up. Other guys are coming into it. They don't have that example. They kind of just stepped into this role, and it's not an easy role to understand, right? Suddenly I have the full weight of discipleship from my family. So we have to allow a little bit of room for growth. And that's where I think asking the Lord for wisdom and discernment, asking him to help us understand what we can change about ourselves is so important. And then letting the Lord do his work and his perfect work also in our spouse is important. Okay, so that all being said, those are kind of my 8 tips that I would suggest very humbly, because I am still very much a work in process as a homeschool dad. Kristen often says, if anything happens to you, I will never go looking for another husband. One of you was enough, and I have ruined her for all other men. Okay. If I was speaking to myself, if I could speak to my 20-something self or my 25-year-old self, something I would say, and I don't know that I would listen very well, but something I would say to myself is, your family needs you to lead. They need you to lead and be the example that Christ was, that he laid down his life, set aside his interest to make his bride, the church, beautiful and glorious. And that's not easy for sure, but you need to provide safety emotionally and physically. You need to be looking out for those around you and making sure that you are a safe person to be around, and that the environment around you is a safe place to be. Because if you create a place where it's not safe and there's anxiety and fear and there's tension and all of this, unhealthy behaviors will come. Carrie, I will go through and repeat a couple real quick. Yep. And then spiritually, the other is in in speaking to myself, I would encourage you that spiritually, you have the responsibility to lead your family spiritually. In being in ministry for a lot of years, one thing I've seen is that many times where the head goes, the body follows. And I know there are exceptions to this rule, and this is not the absolute. But many times the spiritual example that the father sets in the home is the course or the path that the children take. They follow the examples of their fathers. And as a dad, when I have committed myself spiritually to growing in the Lord and serving him, my children have followed my example, and they have continued that way. When I have been lax in that, when I've lowered the standards of our home, when I've allowed things into my home that were not pure and holy and good, it has affected and hurt my family. And so, number one, I need to be safe emotionally. Number two, you need to make sure that you are leading spiritually well. You can't take people where you haven't gone, and you can't expect anything from your children that you're not willing to do yourself. And so as a young dad, I would encourage you to step up your game, to understand grace and mercy, to understand what it is to lead with humility and in the Spirit of Christ. Those things will serve you well if you commit yourself to being a disciple of Christ in these areas. Okay. And number three, I would say to myself, you get what you lead, buddy. That if you don't like the current situation in your home, you don't like the relationship you have with your family and your wife and your kids, the buck stops with you. There's nobody to blame but yourself. And you have to figure out what it is that you've done that may cause this, and what you can do to bring about change. So those are the three things I would say to myself. Let's see. Let me just say, the simple tips. Thanksgiving, find something to be thankful for your own health, not for theirs. Number two, love the homeschool you have, not the one you wish you had. That's just realistic expectations, and trusting that the Lord has given you the tips, tools, resources, everything you need to be successful. Number three, look for wins. Reward the behavior that you want. We've talked a lot about that with kids, but that also works well in relationships with those around us. Number four, because we don't enable the emotional childhood of young men. Encourage them to be men. Let them know what the masculine role is in protecting and leading and providing safety for their family. That's important. Number five, avoid bad brain. Stay away from or learn how to work with triggers that cause us to go into good brain. What we want is constructive conversation, not protective, defensive conversation. Number six, ask what their educational goals are. What do they want for the family? What is, maybe we're in conflict because it's not important to them that they do well academically. And maybe we need to understand why academics are important, and make them begin to ask themselves the questions that lead them to good answers, kind of like coaching does. 7 is to raise the bar. Find and make sure you are surrounded by people who cause you to want to do better, and also make sure that you are doing that for those around you. Okay. Number 8 is giving each other room for growth, knowing that a 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old husband is not going to be as mature as a 50-year-old man is, because he doesn't have the life experience. He doesn't have the maturity at that point. And so there's comparison is the death of happiness. We don't want to do that. So, okay. Let's see. Desiree says, women want the men to lead spiritually. They just do. 100%. I think we confuse leading spiritually. There's so much confusion and perversion in the roles between men and women in the church. And we could go on for days and days about that. But the best way for me to lead spiritually is for me to go there. If I will commit myself to growing in the Lord spiritually, my family will follow my leadership. I don't necessarily need to tell my family how to be spiritual. I need to be spiritual. And in being spiritual, my family will also be spiritual, is my 2 cents in that. And that as well is, it's a journey. We can't be lazy, guys. We have to be intentional about that. Just something simple like understanding who is Jesus Christ and what is that relationship of grace? What is the relationship of mercy? And as I begin to make him the object of my studies, I begin to grow in an appreciation. We have some great resources for that, like Jesus Unmasked and whatnot. So yes, Carity, you get what you lead 100%. If at any time, as a father, as a husband, I can step back, look at the situation, and realize I did this. I have no one to blame but myself for the pain that I have inflicted on my family at different times, for the failures in my spiritual leadership. And if I want to improve that game, the only way to do it is to improve myself here and here. So, all right. Sensitive topic, and hopefully it was a blessing to you. You were able to pick some things from it. As I said in the previous one that cut out, Holy Spirit trumps everything I say. So ask the Holy Spirit to lead you, to give you wisdom and insight. He promises that he will, and hopefully able to see growth in your homeschool. Before I leave, one thing I would like to talk about, we have a new book that was just released. It was written by Ray Comfort called The Final Curtain. It's unique in that if you flip it over, it's a second book called From the Ledge, A Conversation with Comfort. The first book, it deals with depression and suicide. If you know somebody that's dealing with depression or thoughts of suicide, or maybe you are dealing with depression, The Final Curtain, Ray Comfort looks at celebrities who have committed suicide or died through addiction and drug overdoses and self-inflicting medication type stuff that's produced death. Anyways, he talks about it from a biblical perspective, and almost like in an interview process. If he had the opportunity to talk to Prince or George Michael or famous people who have committed suicide, if he had that opportunity, this is what he would say to them based on the worldview or mindset that they had. And I think it's a great resource for a biblical approach to the issue of depression and suicidal thinking. Kirk Cameron says, "My heart breaks for my Hollywood friends who are trapped in the prison of fear and depression when there is a way out. The Final Curtain reveals the key that unlocks the prison door." So that's the first side of the book. It's 2 books in one, because when you flip it over, you have the book From the Ledge, Conversation with Comfort. And this is a fictional account of an encounter that Ray would have with somebody who is on the ledge, and he is helping them walk through the journey of why they're depressed, what's happening, and then helping them spiritually. So this is new out and available, and I would encourage you, if you know somebody, to pick this resource up. So Dana, National Suicide Prevention. Thank you, Dana. Yeah, happening more and more. We see more celebrities, more people who are attaining high levels of success and wealth and whatnot, and yet they're unhappy. And what are they missing for that to happen? So great resource to pick up. And great. Well, hopefully, again, this is a blessing to you. If there are questions or comments, feel free to make them. If you disagree, feel free to disagree. That is absolutely the right and privilege you have. All right, guys, God bless you all. I pray you have a good weekend, and we do pray for your homeschool. We are continuing to pray for homeschool dads, that the Holy Spirit will light them up, that we will begin to see growth in that area. We'll see leadership growth, we'll see spiritual growth, we'll see emotional growth in the homeschool dads. That is my prayer for my life. That is a prayer for the life of homeschool dads that I am close to, and that is the prayer that I have for your husband and your family. All right. God bless you all. Have a great weekend. Thank you.